Dr. Kimmel, you have written extensively about the topic of masculinity in regards to hatred and violence, in particular angry white men. Is violence and anger more prevalent in men?
I think that everybody can get angry. The question isn't whether you get angry or whether even you feel hateful. The question is what you do with those emotions, what you do, how you act with them. And what we know is that the preponderance of hate crimes are perpetrated by men. We know that the march in Charlottesville was overwhelmingly white males. And I do think that there is an element that can be traced back, as Amanda says, to the current political environment. After all, after Charlottesville, when those guys were walking down the street saying, "Jew will not replace us," and Donald Trump, our president, says there were some really fine people there, I think that sends a message that overt expressions of anti-Semitism are perfectly acceptable to this president, regardless of his family connections. So I do think that that's there. I think that one of the things that I'm finding is that the increased amount of violence and anger coming from white men comes from that feeling of being unjustly victimized, that they feel that they were entitled to certain goodies, that they were entitled to certain positions in society. They don't feel they're getting them. Other people, are getting them. And they feel really aggrieved by this. And this feeling of aggrieved entitlement, I think, often fuels the anger and the rage that we see being expressed politically in our country today. It fuels that kind of sense of tribalism.
Amanda?
I just want to jump in on that because also our statistics show, for instance, racist skinheads, which is a big problem right here in the Southern California area, it tends to be almost entirely appealing to young men between 18 and 25. So it's not just all men. It's a certain age group as well. And I do think there is a combination of entitlement, as you're saying, and aggrievement. But I also think there is the pull of the need to belong. And I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, but I'll bet you guys have something to say about that.
Dr. Ryan.
If I may add something, at the Amen Clinics, we've done the largest gender study looking at 46,000 brain scans. And we looked at the differences between women's brains and men's brains. And what we found was very fascinating. Women's brains tend to be more active in the emotional or the limbic parts of the brain and in the frontal lobes. So women, as a general, tend to be more bonding, more empathic, more likely to have appropriate concern. Men's brains, however, were more sleepier and tend to have lower frontal lobe functioning, which puts them at risk of more impulsivity. Especially what we just talked about earlier with hate crimes towards women and the Me Too movement being Time Magazine's Person of the Year. You take the combination of testosterone along with lower frontal lobe function and you have a potential disaster. And think about it. Who gets hit in the head more? In football, it's men. Who gets hit in the head more with soccer headers? Men. Who is 14 times higher to be incarcerated? Men. 5 times higher risk of ADD. Men. Men's brains put them at risk of more bad behaviors.
Dr. Kimmel, you agree?
It's interesting to hear these sorts of biological arguments, but I want to return to something that Amanda said that is so crucial. It is not maleness. It is not the male brain. From my perspective, I have spent the past several years, my new book that you mentioned earlier, Healing from Hate, I've spent the past several years talking to young men who were neo-Nazi white supremacist skinheads who got out of the movement. And every one of them has exactly the story that Amanda just said. Yes, of course, that sense of aggrieved entitlement that I talk about, but also that sense of needing community and camaraderie. These guys do not get recruited into the hate movement because their brains are predisposed toward hatred. They get recruited because they feel isolated and alone, and these neo-Nazi skinhead white nationalists come up to them. They say, "You're one of us, hang out with us. We have awesome parties, we all get drunk, there's girls," and they become part of it because these guys validate their masculinity, validate their need for community and camaraderie. That's what brings them into the movement.
Watch new episodes of Larry King Now Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on demand on Aura TV and Hulu.